Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Hess. Thank you again for coming in, and it's been a pleasure to meet you the first time, and I've really looked forward to this second meeting. Yes, and how was your vacation? Super. Well, I'm really glad that you and the family were able to take that time to, enjoy all of the hard work that you guys have put into getting in the financial position that you're in. And meanwhile, while you were enjoying with the family, one of the things and per the information you helped us, which was incredibly helpful. So thank you again for, we know it's a lot of information on the front end, but it really does make a big way for us to be able to go through and look at this and do an analysis of the information and make sure that we help put together a plan that's not only comprehensive, but really has your goals in mind and allows us to work together as thought partners to really develop a plan that I think will allow you guys to succeed now, make some changes that we'll get into here in a bit, but then also look forward to a future that you've put thought into and will feel prideful and thoughtful about. And so we really look forward to presenting what we have here today. Did you guys, by chance, we did send over the documents electronically, but just to make sure and prompt today, we always print out hard copies. And so if you guys would like, I do have some copies here for you. Great, yeah. So feel free at any point during this meeting to look through that information. Don't hesitate to pause me, ask any questions, and then additionally, you guys can take home those copies. And along with that, if you prefer at home, you can look over the electronic copies. And so like I said, if you have any questions along the way, just stop me. And then if any questions come up after the fact, this of course is not our last chance to talk about that, and you guys can feel free to email me. Great. So to get us started, basically, let's just go over your goals briefly. So to make sure that we have the right scope, we are putting together a comprehensive plan for the both of you. And in doing so, one of the starting places that I think is critical for both us and for you to be on the same page about is those goals. And so stop me here if I misstate anything, but your first goal was to reduce any estate and gift tax liability and ensure all estate planning documents are in order. Great. Second, and equally as important, reviewing your insurance contracts, discussing sort of the implications around making some changes there, and then ultimately some of the long-term care options. I know both of you are in excellent health here today, but as life throws at us, we begin to age, and it's important, especially while you two are healthy and sort of approaching, the early 70s, that you really focus on what can we do now to prepare ourselves for some of the costs that come along with aging. So in short, we'll talk about insurance and some of those long-term options. And then third would be reducing your personal income taxes. So I know, and again, congratulations, Mr. Hess. We know how much goes into building a successful business, but then on top of that, to find yourself in a position where you have been able to find someone to take over that practice who is interested in buying that from you. It's just an incredible thing to see people go through. And so again, we wanted to congratulate you for all that hard work, and we're proud to be a part of making some decisions on how you can use that for your future with Mary. So then fourth would be, based on what you've shared with us and some of the information that you've answered in here, we have deemed that you do in fact have a high risk tolerance. And so with that, you guys are of course in a position where we do think you can stomach risk, and we'll get more into that a little bit later in sections kind of about the investments and some other decisions that you guys can consider. But because you do have a high risk tolerance, we will kind of go through some of the changes that we would recommend to allow for a successful future in light of that. And so does that sound correct, those four goals? Super. Well, that's a great starting place for us. And so with that, we'll kind of then go into what we like to start with is not only the goals, but then also to assess where you guys are at currently. And so where we call that, or how we look at that, is sort of your current financial situation. And a lot of the information then takes that and some of the assumptions that we've agreed on about what may happen in the future. And together with those things, we can put together a plan. And so right now, some current information, and as you guys flip over sort of that first sheet you'll see there, Mr. Hess, exactly, that's right. So what you're going to be looking at here is we'll look at both a balance sheet, and then that second page that Mrs. Hess is currently on will be more of the inflows and outflows. So a little bit like a cash flow statement. So with that, one of the things that we were able to put together and find out, you guys do have a sizable net worth. And again, that's big congratulations. I know over time you've built that up and worked very hard. And so your current net worth is just shy of 13 million. So together you two have $12,885,758. And then sort of on that cash flow side, we look at the ins and outs, and this particular year, you guys do have a net disposable income of just shy of $1,300,000. And so what that means, net disposable income, it's a fancy way of saying we looked at the inflows, which a large part of that is the $1 million that's coming from the down payment from the sale of John's business. And so that's 1 million of that, and then we look at the other inflows coming into you guys this calendar year. And we compare that against your liabilities. And as such, we get what's called net disposable income, which is really our way of saying what cash do you guys have when we look at your inflows minus your outflows. And then another thing we like to do is it's called a current ratio. So when you're looking sort of at your assets and your liabilities, one of the important things is making sure that, God forbid, something were to happen, or if you needed cash now, that you have enough cash to sort of cover those needs. And when we talk about that, we're really looking at 3 to 6 months. And so for you guys, with the 1 million coming in, you guys have a great current ratio. And how we do that is we look at the current assets, so assets that are liquid, that are ready to be used against your current liabilities. And what that means is instead of looking at all your liabilities, we look at sort of the ones coming up in the next 12 months. And so together we did a calculation, which you'll see there, and the details also provide this sort of how this is calculated. But you guys actually amazingly have a current ratio of 40 to 1. And so that is an incredibly high ratio, and something that we'll actually want to consider. Perhaps maybe it's even too high. But for now, we will get into this. We do think having that is good, especially with some of the tax liabilities that may be coming up due to the sale of the business. And so having some extra cash there is never a bad thing. But we usually look at a benchmark of about 1. And so really, you guys are 40 times that. So you have a lot of excess liquid assets there, which is cash, savings, and then those, certificates of deposit, exactly. So you guys are great there. You have plenty of liquid assets to cover things in the short term. In addition to that, some highlights is you guys own your home outright. So your primary residence, right now it has a fair market value of $900,000 with no mortgage. And then your vacation home has a fair market value of $750,000. And that's exactly right. We do still have, or what we've seen there is a mortgage balance of just shy of $50,000. And one of the things maybe we'll consider is looking at whether or not we'd want to pay off that mortgage. And really, there's pros and cons to doing so. One of the pros for sure is simplicity. I know as you guys have moved into retirement, simplicity seems to be a theme that makes a lot of people feel as though they have freedom and more chance to do things like the wonderful vacation you did. And so that's definitely something to consider, but by no means do we need to rush into making that decision. So then, does that sound fair? And we look at your current situation again to kind of get a starting place, and then in light of those goals, we'll then move into some more recommendations on some of the main planning areas. And so just before we go into those main planning areas, as a reminder, part of what goes into our comprehensive plans is we do look at your financial health, so kind of the current situation that we just reviewed together. In addition, we do what's called risk management. So we look at your insurance policies. Do you have adequate coverage? Do we need to add coverage in certain areas and make sure, God forbid, there's an emergency or an accident that you guys are safe and covered? In addition, we do investment planning. We do retirement planning, tax planning, and estate planning. And so throughout this presentation, stop me at any point, but we will go through each of those sections. We'll talk a little bit about what we saw from the information you provided, and we'll also go through our recommendations. So second thing we'll cover, main section, is the risk management section. So what we did is we prepared a couple of scenarios to look at the different coverages you guys have on your properties, on your automobiles, yourselves, your insurance for health reasons. And then in addition, per the request you guys had, we did go ahead and prepare sort of an analysis to understand and see if what you guys were thinking about in terms of long-term care policies would be something for you. And so without further ado, the first thing we looked at was the two residences. So one of the things we noticed is, and this happens from time to time with real estate, as the property appreciates, one of the things that's good to do is every several years sort of look at what's happened in the real estate market and make sure that your insurance coverage is updated adequately to kind of go with that appreciation. And so the primary residence, what we look for is about 80% of the fair market value, so the value of your home today in the market. We want to see about 80% coverage of that value. And so if you kind of take out the land from your primary residence and you just look at the residence itself, the structure, the fair market value today is $775,000. And so with that, when you do the calculation, which it's detailed there for you guys to see visually as well, we'd want to see a coverage of about $620,000. And currently your policy only provides $400,000. And so this is something we'll definitely want to, of course, connect with your insurance broker. And as you know from our first meeting, full disclosure, working together with your insurance broker, who we know well also, because of the referral, we do have to disclose to you that we will be receiving $1,333 sort of as a commission or a payment related to sort of that relationship. And so a part of that, just to disclose with you, is that is one element, but that's just in the sake of honesty and transparency. Then moving on to your vacation home, unlike the primary residence, we actually found that the coverage is adequate. And so currently the coverage, which is an HO3 policy, which is a technicality I'll come back to here in a second, which is the type of coverage you have on both of your residences. The vacation home does have adequate coverage, currently at $460,000. And sort of the calculation behind that, because the fair market value of the property is $550,000 without the land. Again, we look for 80% coverage of that amount, which would be $440,000. And so you guys do have adequate coverage with that $460,000. Because the vacation home, it's probably lovely and you enjoy it, it is right on a river. One of the things that is a reality with the HO3 policy is to remember that unless we are to add certain additional coverages, which in the insurance world are called endorsements, we'll probably want to add an endorsement specifically for any flood damages. And the reason for that is that HO3 policies don't specifically cover against flood damage. And considering the proximity there, I think it's better safe than sorry. And so it would be good for us to look at adding an endorsement with your broker to make sure that you guys are covered for flood coverage. And then similarly for both of the residences, one of the things we also look at, because by adding coverage, one of the things, and I can see Mr. Hess, you're hesitant when I say add coverage, and that's normal. I think one of the things that happens by adding coverage naturally, as you both know, the premiums then increase. But one of the areas we look at that can also help offset that, or in some ways maybe make it seem less expensive, is we do also then look at the deductible you have for both policies. And currently for the primary residence, the deductible is only $500. And given your current ratios for cash on hand and liquidity, we think you guys could stomach a higher deductible. And so we'd recommend bumping that up to probably at least $1,500. So going ahead and tripling that deductible, if not more. And we can work together with your broker to kind of look at the pros and cons of increasing that. But it certainly will help with the increased premiums from adding additional coverage. And so think of it as sort of an offset. You'll get more adequate coverage, and hopefully by adjusting that deductible, you can also kind of hopefully offset some of those increased costs as well. So then going on to your auto policy, Overall, the auto policy looks great. I think that you guys have adequate coverage. Right now, as it stands, it will cover $200,000 of bodily injury per accident per person, and then $600,000 total per accident. So if there's multiple individuals involved, it will be $600,000 for the entire accident. And then lastly, sort of that third number you see and how it's listed on the policy, that's usually for property damage. And the one area we may suggest looking closer at is right now the policy only provides for $15,000 of property damage coverage. And, you know, considering automobiles as they also get more expensive, and you know, it's dangerous on the roads. And so one of the things we would incorporate and suggest looking at is kind of increasing that property damage coverage. And that would be to make sure that you guys, you know, God forbid there's an accident where the cars really do get messed up, you have adequate coverage there to cover that. Then moving forward, one of the things beyond the auto policy and some of the property things is we look at your health insurance. And so, of course, right now you guys have great coverage. You guys have Medicare Part A, B, and D. We would suggest, and if you're open to it, there's something called Medicare Part C, and it's also oftentimes referred to as Medicare Advantage. It sort of adds some additional benefits to the current coverage you get. So similar to Medicare A, B, and D, Medicare Advantage or Medicare Part C will be a little bit more of a comprehensive package under the similar services and provisions to you guys, but it'll also add some things such as dental and vision coverage. And as you guys age, I think that's something for sure to consider, and we really would recommend adding Medicare Part C if you are open to it. Then additionally, per your recommendation, we did do some analysis to see whether or not we would agree with you that adding a long-term care coverage would be wise, and we do agree with you. You know, we think as you guys continue to age and you are in excellent health, which is fantastic, it's a great time to sort of get coverage like long-term care coverage, because it can be very expensive if you do need long-term care as you guys age or if you get injured. And so we would recommend doing that. Our recommendation would be to have a policy that pays benefits for either 3 years or up to $360,000. And that should really help cover you guys in the event that it is needed. And so with that, of course, as any policy, there are premiums. And so for John, the premium would be $6,400 annually. And for Mary, it would be $5,000 annually. And yes, those are additional costs, but like you guys thought, you know, long-term care coverage is definitely, we think, a good way to go, especially because if you are injured, sometimes costs can get up to even about $10,000 per month. And so it's really important to have that coverage there if and when you do need it. Then kind of moving forward to some of the logistics, we do and always look at this too. You do have some valuable items from your parents, Mr. Hess. And so the inverted Jenny stamp has certainly appreciated in value and is a very rare, valuable thing. And so right now, your HO3 policies for your primary residence and your vacation home, they don't specifically cover the stamp and then also the lovely boat that you guys have. And so we would recommend adding endorsements at the minimum to the homeowner's insurance policies to specifically itemize and cover the stamp, as well as getting some additional coverage around the boat. But perhaps even better is looking at sort of a specific valuable articles insurance policy. And that would be specifically for the stamp. That way the insurance company has an appraisal and they know the value of that. And God forbid something were to happen, or if it was damaged or misplaced, it would get covered. Any questions? I'll stop there for a moment. Super. So then lastly, in terms of risk management, one of the things that we do look at, and given your sizable net worth, in addition to these specific coverages for things you have, it is very important to look at the whole picture. And in light of that, one of the things that's offered is what's called an umbrella policy. And so we think for the additional costs, which are minimal in comparison to some of the standard policies we've discussed here, we would recommend adding a $10 million umbrella policy. And what that does is it's sort of a fail-safe. So let's just say you exhaust your coverages on any of the underlying policies. That umbrella policy will kick in, and it'll sort of be supplemental to the other coverages you have. That's exactly right. Mrs. Hess, you're right on it. And so I think it's one of those things that, it's, again, better safe than sorry. And because you guys are wanting to have adequate coverage, it definitely is worth considering. It's something that we do recommend to many clients. Any questions on your risk mitigation and or insurance and any of the recommendations? Wonderful. Well, like I said, at any point, let us know if you have questions. As you review it, we'd be more than happy to go through any of those details. Moving forward into the investment planning. So you guys do have considerable assets, both in your qualified and non-qualified portfolios. In addition to that, through your working careers, you did develop what's called a 401k, as you know, and a 403b. And those are, when I say qualified, I'm referencing those two accounts. And then when we reference in our reports as well the non-qualified accounts, that's of course the stock portfolio as well as the mutual fund portfolio. And so at a high level, you currently have $3.8 million or so in non-qualified assets, and just shy of 1.6 million in qualified assets. And so we did do some ratios. One of them is called the Sharpe ratio, and we sort of look at, in comparison to what we expect and see in the market, how is your portfolio performing? And so specifically for the stock portfolio, the Sharpe ratio did indicate to us that the stock portfolio was slightly underperforming. And so with that, one of the things that we would recommend, and unless there was a specific reason that you two wanted to hold the 4 stocks, which is stock A, B, C, and D, we do see some opportunity to take advantage of some tax loss harvesting. And so because you guys have considerable income with the sale of John's business, we do think it would be wise, if you're open to it, to liquidate that stock portfolio. In turn, this would also help us with some of the diversification that you guys want to see. And in doing so, the net proceeds that would track from the liquidation of those 4 stocks, we would have a net effect of taking on $20,000 in long-term losses. And what that'll allow us to do is, over the course of several years, in applicable tax years, when your income is at a certain threshold, you'll be able to take advantage of a $3,000 loss, and that'll help offset some of the tax liabilities in those higher income years. And so we would recommend liquidating that portfolio, and we know it's extremely important to the both of you as we make changes or any recommendations to the portfolio to not hold tobacco stocks. And we've seen this and learned over the years. I think many people have learned the effects of tobacco. And so, of course, we'll definitely be mindful of that and be sure to avoid those where possible. Then sort of what to do with that money, and Mr. Hess, that's a great question. I think one of the things we recommend then, if we liquidate that stock portfolio, is we would want to redeploy those assets. And how we would suggest doing that is in one of 2 ways. One is to keep in mind that high risk tolerance you guys have, and 2, this goal of diversifying the portfolio. And to do that, we would recommend through a strategy called dollar cost averaging, which basically means, no one officially has a crystal ball for the stock market. And of course, when you invest, things can go up and things can go down, as you two have learned with those individual stocks in your stock portfolio. One of the things that we like to do is sort of incrementally get into the market, and this sort of helps offset some mistiming or getting in at a really great time or a really bad time. And so to do that over the course of about 6 months or 6 to 12 months, if you're comfortable with it, we would incrementally take the proceeds from selling off and liquidating that stock portfolio and sort of putting it half into that growth mutual fund that you guys already currently hold. And then in addition, we'd recommend buying some municipal bonds. And the reason why we specifically recommend the municipal bonds is because they're much more tax efficient. And what I mean by that is municipal bonds, they're not subject to any federal taxes. And so because you guys do have significant income, from the installment payments from the sale of John's business, and from other sources. It would be great for us to sort of make investments that are also tax efficient. And so doing those municipal bonds and adding those funds to the growth fund, what will essentially accomplish is an asset allocation that gets you right around 80% stocks and 20% bonds. And so this is sort of right in line with that high risk tolerance that you two have. It'll also help us sort of diversify the portfolio in a strategic way. And again, we'd be able to take advantage of some of those losses and harvest them over time to offset some of your income. And additionally, we'll sort of incrementally go into the market and make sure that, you know, we're sort of hoping to offset some of those mistimings that a lot of people can make the mistake when they jump into the market all at once. And sort of last thing under the investment umbrella, unless you have any questions, is, and we'll get more into this, I think, specifically in the estate planning part of this, but we did notice on your qualified accounts, which we wouldn't suggest making any investment changes to at this time. We think, you know, they're invested well considering your goals. But in addition, we did notice that the beneficiaries for each designate each of your estates as the beneficiary, and to sort of help offset some of the costs after, God forbid, if either one of you were to pass. We do think that sort of updating those primary beneficiaries respectively to have Mr. Hess, you name Mary as your primary beneficiary and vice versa. What this will allow to happen is if either one of you were to pass, it'll avoid probate, and the other of you will be able to take on that account. And then as additionally per the plans and wishes, we would also recommend adding secondary beneficiaries. And God forbid something were to happen to the both of you, you would be able to name your children sort of per stirpes, and that's a designation that sort of says, you know, follow the lineage. And so if you were to pass and it were to go to your children and one of them were to pass, it would say, let's take one of their portions of that and make sure it goes to their children in proportion. And so that's a great way of sort of making sure that those qualified accounts that you've worked so hard to build up end up where you want to go, and will also help us offset some probate costs. Any questions on your portfolio and the investments? Super. So next is your retirement planning. And as I mentioned before, you guys have done an incredible job of building up a net worth that has really allowed for what I think will be a wonderful retirement. And I think with these recommendations, in addition to your diligence, you guys will have a wonderful retirement. And we do some ratios that help us understand a little bit more about the sustainability behind that, and then see if there's any weaknesses that we could address at this stage to ensure that. And so one of the things that we look at is sort of a needs analysis. And based on the current situation and the estimates we've made, which together you may recall, we sort of said that we suspect in your retirement years that the market will perform and give us about a 7% return. And then the inflation will be about 2.25%. And so with that, we're able to say, you know, what are the adjusted for tax returns that we want to see to maintain sustainability for your plan. And so how we calculate that, yes, you'll see right under there in section 1, under retirement planning, we sort of calculate a ratio, and what we've learned from that is that, you know, the inflation adjusted return that we calculated based on those estimates is 4.39%. And then just to be safe and be a little more cautious, we also ran the same scenario, but imagining that you guys only got a 6% return and that inflation was all the way at 4%. And so in this case, in the more conservative approach, the inflation adjusted return came out to just under 2. More specifically, it was 1.92%. And that's definitely something to consider. I think, as always, there's sort of longevity risk and something to watch as market conditions change. If something that significant were to come into play, it could eat away at some of the purchasing power you guys see throughout your retirement. But at this stage, I think the assumptions we've made are fairly safe, and I think for right now, it seems as though you guys have a sustainable plan when we look at your assets and sort of where you guys are at health-wise and sort of your spending. Again, I think under this umbrella of retirement planning, of course, you have those qualified accounts, which are tax advantage. You've been able to contribute to them throughout your career, and they've been able to grow tax deferred. But with that, we really do, again, would recommend sort of updating those beneficiaries, as I mentioned earlier, just to make sure that goes smoothly after your lifetimes. And then last thing to consider, I think, really under the retirement umbrella is, as each of you and Mr. Hess, you are 71, and Mrs. Hess being 68, 72 will come in no time. And so as you approach age 72, one of the realities of the qualified accounts you guys have, both the 401k and the 403b, is that at the age of 72, you will have to take what's called a required minimum distribution, also known commonly as an RMD. And those will be distributions to you that are required based on your age, and they will increase your taxable income. So that's something to keep in mind, and of course there are some options around that if that income wasn't needed or you didn't want to take on additional income which may increase your taxes. But as we approach that, we can continue to monitor that. There is an option that we wouldn't suggest necessarily at this time, but you could convert those accounts to what's called an IRA, an individual retirement account. And unique to IRAs, there's something called a qualified charitable distribution. And the beauty there is you guys are able to designate a charity or charities that distribution that would have been required to go to you through the RMD can actually go to a qualified charity. And in doing so, you're doing good for the world. And then, of course, that would not affect your taxable income. And so one of the ways per your goal to sort of mitigate income taxes as you guys approach 72 would be to continue monitoring that, whether or not you want to take those required minimum distributions, or maybe it'd be beneficial to kind of convert those over to IRAs, which we can do efficiently by rolling them over. And that would allow us then to have that option of a qualified charitable distribution. And so if you're ever interested in that or become more charitably inclined, that's certainly something that we could help with and should be straightforward enough to accomplish for you too. Then going forward, next on our list would be the income tax planning. And I know for the both of you, this was sort of an important topic, not only because the sale of John's business really increased those cash inflows this year, but also generally I think it's an area that a lot of people tend to feel feelings about, and they're neither good nor bad. It would be wise to always remember that part of the reason you pay tax is because you are making money. And so although it may seem, or maybe you don't want to pay those taxes, do remember that oftentimes, as long as we're doing things tax efficiently, you should only be paying tax to the amounts that are absolutely necessary, and it's happening because you are, of course, receiving income, which is a good thing. And so with that in mind, one of the things we specifically looked at per your request was sort of the tax treatment of that 25% down payment of the sale of John's business. What we learned there is that there's what's called a long-term capital gain, which is taxed at a lesser rate than ordinary income. And what we do is we sort of look at that $1 million that comes from 25%, and we sort of subtract out your basis. And so in doing so, we come up with a long-term capital gain of $731,000. And based on this, the tax rate on those long-term capital gains are about 20%. And so with that, we would estimate that there would be a tax bill of about $174,000. Yes, that is high, but it is a part of that increase of inflows, and it is something to consider. And that's also one of the reasons why we really advocated for keeping enough cash there at this time when we talked about your current ratio. Additionally, we looked briefly at the first interest payment, in addition to the first installment payment, and we looked at sort of the interest income portion, the cost basis portion, as well as the gain. And what we learned there, the 10,000% of that, $36,000 or so payment that you'll receive monthly, $10,000 is interest income. and that will be taxed at 37% because it is considered ordinary income. And then the portion that is long-term capital gain, which is just shy of $20,000, will be about 23.8%, and that's because 20% is long-term capital gain tax, and then there's what's called a net investment income tax at 3.8%, which is a newer thing, but it is a part of that. And then about $7,000 of that would not be taxed because that is a return of your basis. And so then moving forward, one of the things you asked us was looking at the stamp. And so in light of, looking forward 10 years and sort of that $1.5 million, or more specifically $1,550,000, there is a 15% commission. And so when we looked at that, that would result in about a $259,000 or so tax liability. And specifically for collectibles and stamps, there's a higher tax rate. It's called an alternative investment long-term capital gains tax of 28%. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, that net investment income tax. And so together you pay about 31.8% tax if you were to sell that stamp. And of course, you could do so. We may recommend holding on to that and continuing to see appreciation there. Overall, we looked at sort of the deductions. A lot of times people itemize deductions because of a limitation called SALT, often known as. We do think that it'd be better for you two as a married couple to take the standard deduction. And that's one way to help offset that income. Then, as we discussed before, another good thing for income tax planning would, again, in your portfolio, buy those municipal bonds. And that would be a way for you to get in the market. But at the same time, sort of have some tax advantage assets there that help not incur so much income tax. Any questions on that front? Great. And like I said, if you have questions that pop up, feel free to ask them whenever you think of them. And you can jump through the sections as always. And so as we kind of get towards the end here, what I want to go through is your estate planning. Some of the efficiencies we see there, it's an area we definitely think that we can make a lot of improvements for you. And then we'll go over, once again, those goals quickly and sort of the high-level action plan. And of course, at the end of the last page that you see there, yes, Mrs. Hess, the action plan really gives the most, what we see as the immediate needs or updates. And then, of course, all of these would be our recommendation as we've gone through these. So at a high level, neither of you have a taxable estate. And so what that means is right now, given the current tax laws, each of you can have an estate of $11.7 million. And there is a lifetime exemption on that would sort of offset any assets you have up until that amount. And there wouldn't be an estate tax unless you have assets above and beyond that. So right now, for each of you, and you can see this closer on your balance sheet as well, which assets are in John's name specifically and which are in Mary's, and then which, of course, you guys have or own together, which is that joint tenancy you see there. So right now, you don't have, and you've done a great job in many areas. One of the things we really would recommend is sort of meeting with an estate planning lawyer. And if you don't know one that you like or have a recommendation from a friend, we'd be more than happy to provide one with you. We work with many excellent estate planning lawyers. What they'll help you implement on one hand is definitely what's called a power of attorney, and then a healthcare proxy. These are documents that will allow you to express your interests and desires should anything happen to you in a medical emergency, and then also who you want to designate in your life to help make decisions for you if you ever became incapacitated or unable to make decisions for yourself. In addition, we see a huge opportunity for you two to meet with a estate planning lawyer and look at the idea of having some revocable trusts. The revocable trust will allow you to retitle those assets, and in doing so, it'll remove and hopefully help prevent those high probate costs. I know both of you expressed some worry about those $250,000 for each of you, which is very high of probate costs should you pass. And so one of the ways to effectively accomplish that is with the estate planning lawyer retitling a lot of those assets into the name of the revocable trust. And then your lawyer could work with you to have language that ensures that those assets are dealt with as per your wishes. And it'll also help, again, avoid probate. And if you're not comfortable or want to think more about the revocable trust, We would still recommend retitling a lot of those assets to get them out of your individual names from a title standpoint, and at least change a lot of them either to joint tenancy where possible, or what's also called tenancy by the entirety. And what that would do is allow, if either one of you were to pass or something were to happen, it could transition to each of you instead of into your estates. And then again, for estate planning, it would be great to update those beneficiaries on your qualified accounts like we've talked about. And really the action there, and we'll see this again in the action plan, is prioritizing meeting with that estate planning lawyer. So then at a high level, again, to recap, and we're wrapping up here, is we've looked at your goals, we've looked at your financial situation, we've spent time talking about insurance, your portfolio and your investment assets. We've looked at your balance sheet and your inflows and outflows. But overall, I think one of the things that we love to do in a concise way is sort of an action plan. And so we've listed 4 things here that we think, if nothing else, would be the essentials to implement. And so first, as you'll see under there, under number 1, and again, just to reiterate before we go into these are specific areas that we think, in addition to the great things you've done, could really improve and help you achieve that financial position you guys want in retirement and have a successful future. And so the first thing we would do is, again, prioritize as soon as possible, maybe even this week if it's doable. Great. Excellent. And so, yeah, if you could prioritize that and you have the availability, it would be wonderful for you guys to get in there. Be sure to let us know if you have any follow-up questions, to feel prepared, and meet with that estate planning lawyer. Make sure that he helps walk you through those decisions and get those documents in place. At a high level, the second goal there, an action, would be to review with your broker, and we're happy to help communicate directly with him as well. We do want to add insurance in the following areas. So your primary residence, increasing that face amount coverage we've talked about. For your auto policy, increasing the property damage coverage. Adding an endorsement to the vacation home to make sure you're covered in the event of a flood. Definitely getting and implementing that umbrella insurance to cover you should any of the other coverage get maxed out. And then it's a valuable articles insurance or endorsements around for the stamp specifically, and then maybe some coverage or an endorsement specifically to get more boat coverage. And then last but not least, for your health and aging related costs, we would want you to add Medicare Part C if you're open to it. And then implementing that $360,000 or 3-year long-term care policy. And so really that's a lot of things. It is detailed there for you, and your broker, of course, will be able to help, and we're happy to do so as well. And then our last recommendation, of course, for the portfolio in terms of a high-level action plan, would be to diversify that portfolio. So again, liquidating those stocks unless you want to hold them, kind of redeploying them strategically, both into the growth mutual fund and buying some municipal bonds over time. And that'll allow you to embrace that risk tolerance you guys are comfortable with, and also allow for some growth and an inch into the market. And then last but not least, and I know I've talked a lot, but it seems as though you guys have been smiling much through this meeting. I would love to meet with you guys again in 2 weeks. I think this gives you guys some time to go home and digest and think about this information, ask any questions as they pop up. We're always here to help. But that 2-week mark will allow you to kind of meet with your broker and your estate planning lawyer, start to implement those changes, and then we'll revisit it and see where I can help again in a couple of weeks. And so I look forward to doing it. Thank you again for your time. Take care.